Mia tapped her fingers on the white linen tablecloth, her eyes locked on the flickering candle in front of her. The dinner, once steaming hot, had gone cold. The wine glass beside her remained untouched, reflecting the dim glow of the chandelier. She inhaled sharply, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. Tonight was their anniversary. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of love that had slowly faded into something unrecognizable. The night felt like a cruel echo of the past. Another year, another forgotten promise. Her husband, Ryan, was nowhere to be found. She glanced at her phone for the 100th time. No texts, no calls, no explanations. She had sent him a simple message earlier. Happy anniversary. But the only response was silence. The clock on the wall ticked past 11. Mia clenched her jaw, shoving the plate away. The effort she had put into making this night special felt like a joke now. With a deep breath, she stood up, dragging her fingers through her loose curls. Just as she reached to blow out the candle, the doorbell rang. Her heart jumped. For a moment, a ridiculous hope flickered in her mind. Maybe Ryan had remembered? Maybe he had come home with an excuse, a last-minute save. She rushed to the door, smoothing down her dress as she pulled it open. A stranger stood there, a deliveryman holding an extravagant bouquet of deep red roses and a sleek black box tied with a satin ribbon. "Mia Carter?" he asked. She blinked in confusion. "Yes?" He handed her the bouquet and the box with a polite nod. "This is for you, Ma'am. Enjoy your evening." Mia hesitated before taking the package. The roses were fresh, their scent rich and intoxicating. A small white card peeked from between the petals. With slightly trembling fingers, she pulled it out. One sentence, written in bold, confident handwriting. "A woman like you should never be forgotten. Lucas." Mia's breath caught in her throat. Lucas. She hadn't seen or heard from him in years, yet here he was, slipping back into her life, with a gesture so bold, so dangerously timed. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a gift. It was a message, a reminder. And Ryan would lose his mind if he saw this. Mia closed the door slowly, her fingers still gripping the edge of the note. Her heart pounded as she stared at the name written in dark ink. Lucas, a name she had buried in the past, a name Ryan despised. She placed the bouquet on the table, her thoughts racing. Why now? Why, after all these years? The sleek black box in her other hand suddenly felt heavier. She hesitated, her pulse quickening as she untied the satin ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a delicate diamond bracelet, the exact one she had once admired years ago, but never bought for herself. Maya swallowed hard. This wasn't just a random gift. Lucas had remembered. A rush of emotions flooded her. Confusion, nostalgia, anger, and something else she wasn't ready to admit. Before she could process it further, the front door swung open with force. Ryan had finally come home. He walked in, his phone in one hand, his tie slightly loosened, his expression blank, until his eyes landed on the roses and the open gift box. His entire body tensed, the exhaustion in his face vanished, replaced by something sharper. His eyes darkened as he read the note Mia had left beside the bouquet. A slow, heavy silence settled between them. "Who sent this?" Ryan's voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the edge underneath. Mia didn't answer immediately. She held his gaze, waiting to see if he would figure it out himself. Ryan picked up the note with 2 fingers, scanning the name at the bottom. Then his expression changed in an instant. His grip on the paper tightened, his jaw clenched and his nostrils flared. "Lucas," he repeated, his voice now dangerously quiet. Mia braced herself. Ryan's knuckles turned white as he crumpled the note in his fist. The jealousy in his eyes burned hotter than she had ever seen before. Mia took a deep breath, steadying herself as Ryan's grip tightened around the crumpled note. His breathing grew heavier, his shoulders rising and falling with barely restrained anger. The weight of his silence was suffocating. She could see the shift in his expression, confusion turning into realization, realization turning into fury. His gaze flickered between the roses, the bracelet and her, as if trying to piece together something unspoken. "Lucas?" he repeated, his voice no longer quiet. It came out sharp, like a knife slicing through the air. "Are you kidding me?" Mia folded her arms across her chest, her own frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "No, Ryan, I'm not kidding. Why the hell is he sending you this?" His hand shot out, grabbing the small jewelry box. He lifted it, his eyes narrowing as he examined the bracelet inside. "This isn't some cheap gesture. This is personal. What the hell is going on, Mia?" She exhaled slowly, trying to keep herself calm. "Nothing is going on." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "Nothing? Then explain why my biggest rival, the man who would love nothing more than to see me fall, just sent my wife flowers and a damn diamond bracelet." He slammed the box onto the table, making Mia flinch. "Go ahead. I'll wait." She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she knew whatever she said, it wouldn't matter. Ryan had already made up his mind. "Maybe you should be asking yourself why he remembered something you didn't," she finally said, her voice colder than she intended. Ryan's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything was still. The tension in the room thickened like a storm about to break. "You think this is about me forgetting our anniversary?" Ryan's voice dripped with disbelief. "That gives him the right to step in like this? To what? Play the hero?" Mia tilted her chin up slightly. "At least someone remembered, Ryan." His jaw clenched. She could see the vein in his temple pulsing, his body so rigid it looked like he was barely holding himself together. "That's what this is about," he said through gritted teeth. "Punishing me because I forgot one night." Mia let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "One night?" "Ryan, it's been years. Years of feeling like an afterthought. Years of watching you put your job, your ego, your damn pride ahead of me." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "And for what? So you can come home late, act like I don't exist, and expect me to just sit here and take it?" Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. His fists clenched at his sides. He had no excuse, and he knew it. Mia took a step forward, her voice softening just enough. "I'm not saying I wanted this, Ryan. I didn't ask for it, but you don't get to stand here and act shocked when someone else sees what you refuse to." Ryan let out a slow breath through his nose, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He stared at the roses, the bracelet, the card, as if they were mocking him. "You didn't shut it down," he finally said. His voice wasn't loud anymore, but it was dangerous. "You didn't throw them away. You didn't call him and tell him to stay the hell out of our lives." Mia's lips parted, but she hesitated. That hesitation was all Ryan needed. His laugh was bitter, humorless. "Unbelievable!" He took a step back, running a hand over his face before dragging it down his jaw. "You liked it," he accused, his voice raw with realization. "You liked knowing that he still thinks about you, that he remembers things I don't." Mia swallowed, her heart pounding. "Ryan, don't!" But it was too late. He picked up the bracelet box again, staring at it like it was some kind of betrayal etched in gold and diamonds. Without warning, he hurled it across the room, sending it crashing against the wall. The sound of metal hitting hardwood rang out, sharp and final. Mia flinched but held her ground. Ryan was breathing hard now, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to keep his emotions in check. His usual composure was gone. "What do you want me to do, Mia?" he asked, his voice rough. "You want me to grovel? Apologize? Buy you something even more expensive so I can prove I still give a damn?" Mia's eyes didn't waver. "I want you to care before someone else does." The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan stared at her, his expression unreadable. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, regret, guilt. But it was gone before she could place it. He took a deep breath, then turned sharply toward the door. Mia's stomach twisted. "Where are you going?" Ryan didn't look back. He grabbed his keys from the counter, his grip tight enough that his knuckles went pale. "To fix this," he muttered. Then, without another word, he walked out the door, slamming it shut behind him. Mia stood frozen, her breath shallow as the echo of the slamming door vibrated through the house. The room, once filled with sharp words and unspoken truths, now felt eerily silent. The shattered pieces of her evening lay scattered. The ruined dinner, the crumpled note, the bracelet still lying where it had landed after Ryan hurled it in rage. Her fingers curled into fists as she forced herself to breathe. Ryan had stormed out, driven by jealousy, anger, and something else, something deeper that neither of them had dared to acknowledge. But where had he gone? And more importantly, what was he going to do? Mia's gaze drifted back to the bouquet. The roses still stood proudly in their vase, untouched by the chaos that had just unfolded. She reached for the note once more, smoothing out the creases Ryan had left in the delicate paper. "A woman like you should never be forgotten." Lucas. The words felt heavier now. She let out a shaky breath, sitting down at the table. This wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge, a warning. Lucas had always been like that, bold, unapologetic, and completely unafraid to push boundaries. Memories crept in before she could stop them. Lucas had once been someone she trusted, someone who had understood her when Ryan didn't. Years ago, before Ryan had fully drowned himself in work and indifference, Lucas had been his closest friend, until they had become bitter rivals. And for what? Business? Ego? Or something much more personal? Mia knew exactly why Ryan hated Lucas. Because once, a long time ago, she had chosen Ryan over him. And now, years later, Lucas was back, not just to haunt Ryan, but to remind Mia of what could have been. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. She grabbed it instinctively, her pulse quickening when she saw the name on the screen. Lucas. Mia's breath hitched. He hadn't contacted her in years. Not once. Not even when things between her and Ryan had started crumbling. She hesitated. Answering would mean stepping into something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Ignoring it wouldn't erase the fact that he had already made his move. The phone rang again. She swallowed hard and, before she could second-guess herself, she answered. A deep, familiar voice greeted her. "I take it he didn't like my gift?" Mia closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "What are you doing, Lucas?" A low chuckle. "Just reminding you that you deserve better?" Her stomach twisted. "Yes, this isn't fair." "Isn't it?" Lucas's voice softened just slightly. "Tell me, Mia, if it were the other way around, if another woman had done for Ryan what I just did for you, would he be sitting at home waiting?" Mia's throat tightened. She knew the answer. Number Ryan would have already confronted whoever dared to step into his territory. He would have fought for his pride, for his image, maybe even for love. But what had he done for her? Nothing. Not until Lucas forced his hand. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You didn't have to," Lucas said simply. "I see you, Mia, and I see how much you've been holding yourself back, how much you've been waiting for something that isn't coming." Tears burned at the back of her eyes. She hated how easily Lucas could unravel her. He always had. "I'm not leaving my marriage," she finally said, forcing steel into her voice. A beat of silence. Then Lucas exhaled, a sound laced with both amusement and disappointment. "You say that now?" Mia felt the words hit her like a wave, because deep down, buried beneath years of resentment and loneliness, she wasn't sure if she still believed them herself. Before she could respond, Lucas added, "But if Ryan really cared, he wouldn't be running after me right now. He'd be with you." Mia's breath caught. Ryan went after Lucas? Her stomach twisted as she processed what that meant. What was he planning to do? Confront him? Fight him? She knew Ryan too well. He was a man who acted on impulse when his pride was challenged, and right now Lucas had done more than just challenge him. He had taunted him, pushed him right to the edge. Mia stood up so fast that the chair scraped loudly against the floor. She needed to stop this before it spiraled further. "Where is he, Lucas?" she demanded. Lucas hesitated just long enough for her to know he had been expecting this question. "Meet me at the Regent," he said smoothly. "Unless, of course, you'd rather wait at home and see how badly this ends." The Regent, a high-end lounge downtown, a place Ryan and Lucas used to frequent before their rivalry turned into a full-blown war. Mia felt the cold sting of panic settle in her chest. She grabbed her keys without thinking, her mind racing. This was no longer just about her anniversary. This was about what happened next. And she had no idea if she was about to stop a disaster or walk straight into one. Mia's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The city lights blurred past her, neon reflections streaking against the windshield as she sped toward the Regent. Her heart pounded like a drum, each beat echoing louder than the last. She could barely think, barely breathe. Ryan had gone after Lucas. She could already picture it, the two of them locked in another battle, but this time it wasn't about business, contracts, or pride. This time it was about her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Ryan was never the kind of man to back down from a fight, especially when it came to his ego. And Lucas, he was calculated, dangerous in his own way. He knew exactly which buttons to push, and tonight he had pushed the biggest one. Mia ran a red light, barely noticing the honking horns behind her. Her pulse was deafening, her stomach in knots. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let them destroy each other over a marriage that had already been breaking apart. As she pulled up to the valet at the Regent, she barely waited for the attendant to open her door before she stepped out. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she rushed inside, scanning the dimly lit lounge. Her eyes landed on them immediately. Ryan and Lucas stood near the back, their postures stiff, the tension between them so thick it nearly suffocated the air. Lucas leaned casually against the bar, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, his face unreadable. Ryan stood rigid in front of him, fists clenched at his sides. His entire body radiated fury. Mia moved quickly, slipping between tables and ignoring the curious glances from nearby patrons. As she approached, she could hear the sharp edge in Ryan's voice. "You think this is a game?" Ryan growled. "Sending her gifts? Putting your name in my house? What the hell do you think you're doing?" Lucas took a slow sip of his drink before setting it down, his eyes calm, calculating, unbothered. "I think I'm making up for what you've neglected." Ryan's fist slammed against the bar, rattling the glasses. Several people turned to look, but neither man seemed to care. "You have no place in her life," Ryan seethed. "Stay the hell away from my wife." Lucas tilted his head slightly, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Your wife?" He let the words hang in the air before his smirk faded. "Funny, because she didn't seem too upset when she read my note." Ryan's breath hitched and Mia saw it happen. The exact moment Lucas's words cut deeper than anything else. Mia pushed forward, finally reaching them. "Ryan, stop!" His head snapped toward her, his eyes burning with something between betrayal and desperation. "You shouldn't be here. And you shouldn't be doing this," she shot back, stepping between them before things escalated. "What do you think is going to happen, Ryan? You fight him, and what? That fixes everything? That suddenly makes up for all the years you ignored me?" Ryan flinched, his lips parting as if to argue, but nothing came out. Lucas exhaled, shaking his head as he picked up his glass again. "She's right, you know. You can throw a punch, but that doesn't change what's already happened." Ryan ignored him, his focus solely on Mia. "You're defending him?" His voice cracked slightly, the anger starting to mix with something else. Something raw. Mia closed her eyes briefly before forcing herself to say what needed to be said. "I'm not defending anyone. I'm standing here trying to stop you from making a mistake." She took a deep breath. "Because no matter what you think, this isn't about Lucas. This is about us, and what's left of us." Ryan swallowed hard, his face pale under the dim bar lights. Lucas sighed, setting his drink down before rising to his feet. "If it makes you feel any better, Ryan, I'm not here to steal her." He met Mia's gaze then, his voice softer but firm. "I just wanted her to remember she still has choices." Mia's breath caught. Ryan went still, his jaw locking. Lucas turned to her fully, searching her face. "You don't owe me an answer, Mia." He glanced at Ryan then, eyes sharp. "But you damn well owe yourself one." Silence swallowed them whole. Then, without another word, Lucas walked away. Ryan stared after him, fists still clenched, but the fight had left him. Mia watched Lucas disappear into the crowd, her mind spinning. He had walked away, just like that. No more taunting, no more games. He had thrown the truth in her face and left her to deal with it. She turned back to Ryan. His shoulders had slumped slightly, the weight of the moment finally settling over him. When he looked at her for the first time in years, she saw something real in his eyes. Fear. Fear that she had already made her choice. Fear that this time she wouldn't stay. Mia stared at Ryan, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The weight of everything, the anniversary he had forgotten, the years of neglect, the way Lucas had forced this confrontation to happen, it all pressed down on her chest. Ryan looked like a man standing on the edge of something he didn't know how to escape. His fists had relaxed, but his jaw remained tight, his breathing uneven. For the first time in years, she saw uncertainty in him. She should have felt relieved. She should have felt victorious. But all she felt was exhaustion. Mia exhaled slowly, running a hand through her hair. "Ryan," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't let her finish. "I know," he said abruptly, his voice hoarse. He dragged a hand down his face, looking away for a moment, before locking eyes with her again. "I know I screwed up." She bit the inside of her cheek. "This isn't just about tonight." Ryan nodded stiffly. "I know that too." A silence stretched between them. The bar around them continued as if nothing had happened. People drinking, talking, laughing. It felt strange, standing in the middle of a crowded room, having a conversation that could decide the rest of their marriage. Ryan took a slow breath. "I don't want to lose you." Mia's heart clenched, but she didn't let herself soften just yet. "Then why does it feel like you already did?" His face twisted slightly as if the words had physically hurt him. "I never meant to make you feel like that." "But you did." Mia swallowed against the lump in her throat. "Do you even realize how lonely it's been, Ryan? How long I've been waiting for you to notice me again?" His lips parted, but no words came out. "I used to think if I just held on, if I just waited a little longer, you'd come back to me." Her voice wavered. "But all I've been doing is waiting. And then, tonight, She let out a broken laugh. Lucas remembered something you didn't. Ryan flinched, his jaw tightening. You think I don't hate that? I don't know, she admitted honestly. Do you? His nostrils flared. I hate that I let it get to this point. His voice turned rough. I hate that another man made you feel seen when that should have been me. And I hate that I was too damn blind to see what I was doing to you. Mia looked down at the floor. His words sounded good, but words weren't enough anymore. Ryan suddenly reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against hers. She could feel the heat of his skin, the way his hand trembled just slightly. I don't want to be this man anymore, Mia. His voice was softer now. Raw. Tell me how to fix this. Mia closed her eyes for a second, inhaling deeply. She had dreamed of hearing those words for years. Of Ryan standing in front of her, realizing what he had done, begging to make things right. But now that she was here, she wasn't sure if fixing this was even possible. She lifted her gaze back to him. I don't have an easy answer for you, Ryan. His fingers curled slightly, but he didn't let go. Then, don't give me an easy answer, give me the truth. She took a shaky breath. I don't know if I trust you to change. The word shattered something between them. Ryan's entire body went still, his face draining of colour. He blinked, as if trying to absorb the weight of what she had just said. I want to believe you, Mia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I really do. But how do I know this isn't just your jealousy talking? That you're not just angry because Lucas reminded you that I'm not something you can take for granted? Ryan let out a slow, uneven breath. He looked down at their hands, still barely touching, before he finally let go. I guess I deserve that, he murmured. Mia didn't respond. For the first time, Ryan looked truly lost, like a man standing at a crossroads, knowing that no matter which way he turned, he could lose something. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling sharply. Then, after a moment, he looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Do you still love me? Mia felt her breath hitch. The question hung between them, heavy and suffocating. She should have had an immediate answer. A year ago, she would have. But now, she opened her mouth, but no words came. And that silence was the real answer. Ryan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Then he nodded once, as if something inside him had just broken. He stepped back. Mia's heart squeezed. She wanted to reach for him, to take back the hesitation, to give him something to hold on to. But she couldn't lie, not now. I need time, she finally whispered. Ryan pressed his lips together, then exhaled. Take all the time you need, Mia. His voice was hoarse. Just don't take too long. With that, he turned and walked away. Mia stood there, her hands shaking, watching him disappear through the crowd. And for the first time in years, she was the one left standing alone. Mia stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribcage as she watched Ryan disappear into the night. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, making it harder to breathe. She had expected relief, had convinced herself that if she ever got this moment, this power, she would feel something close to victory. But all she felt was numbness. She turned away from the entrance of the Regent, her heels clicking against the sleek wooden floor as she made her way toward the bar. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the nearest stool, lowering herself onto it. The bartender, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, studied her for a brief moment before sliding a fresh glass of wine in front of her, as if he already knew she needed it. Mia stared at the deep red liquid, swirling it slowly before taking a sip. The warmth of the alcohol burned down her throat, but it did little to ease the storm inside her. For years, she had clung to hope, believing that one day Ryan would realize what he had been losing piece by piece, that he would wake up and see her the way he once had, but standing there, staring into his eyes as he silently begged for an answer she couldn't give, Mia realised something that left her hollow. Maybe she had been waiting for something that was never meant to return. Maybe love wasn't something you could wait for. It was something that either existed or it didn't. And if you had to beg for it, maybe it wasn't there anymore. She let out a slow breath, running a hand through her hair. She had spent so long doubting herself, shrinking herself, pretending that what Ryan gave her was enough. But tonight, Lucas had forced her to see something painful. She had choices. She wasn't trapped. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep fighting for something that no longer felt like it belonged to her. Her phone vibrated against the wooden bar, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, expecting to see Ryan's name. Maybe a final message, a desperate plea to talk. But it wasn't Ryan. It was Lucas. Mia's fingers hovered over the screen. She had already spoken to him once tonight, and that had been dangerous enough. He had already planted enough doubt in her mind. She could ignore him. She should ignore him. But instead, she tapped the screen, lifting the phone to her ear. "You're still at the Regent," Lucas's voice came through, smooth and knowing. It wasn't a question. Mia exhaled. "And you're still watching?" A soft chuckle. "Not exactly. I just know you, Mia. You don't like leaving when there's still a storm in your head." She closed her eyes. He wasn't wrong. Lucas let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. "So? What happens next?" Mia swallowed. "I don't know," Lucas hummed in response. "That's an answer in itself." Her grip on the wine glass tightened. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make this into something it's not." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. "Mia, you can tell yourself whatever you want. You can tell yourself you're just taking time to think, or that you'll work things out with Ryan." His voice lowered slightly, becoming something more intimate, something dangerous. "But deep down, you already know the truth." Mia's heart clenched. Lucas continued, his voice softer now. "You wouldn't have hesitated if you still loved him." She shut her eyes, hating that his words hit her like a strike to the chest. "I do love him," she whispered, as if saying it out loud could make it true. Lucas didn't mock her. He didn't push. He simply said, "Then why did you let him walk away?" Mia opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer. Because the truth was, she had let him leave. She could have stopped him, could have reached for him, could have fought for him, but she hadn't. And that silence between them had been louder than any argument they had ever had. Lucas sighed again, softer this time. "You deserve to be chosen, Mia." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Good night, Lucas," she murmured, ending the call before he could say anything else. She set the phone down on the bar, gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She had come here to stop a disaster, but maybe, just maybe, the real disaster had already happened, and she had just been too afraid to see it. Mia sat at the bar, staring into her half-empty glass of wine. The low hum of conversation surrounded her, laughter and murmured voices blending into the soft jazz playing through the lounge speakers. It felt strange, being alone in a place where she was supposed to have spent the night celebrating her anniversary. She exhaled slowly, pressing her fingertips against her temples. How had it come to this? The weight of the evening settled heavily on her chest. She had watched Ryan walk away. She had let him go. And now she was sitting here, dissecting every second of that moment, wondering if she had made the right choice, or if the choice had been made for her long before tonight. The truth was, she hadn't felt like Ryan's wife in a long time. She had felt like a habit, a part of his routine, something always there but never really noticed. Her marriage had become a house she had been quietly holding together, brick by brick, while Ryan never even noticed the cracks forming in the foundation. And tonight, everything had finally collapsed. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to return, to fight for her. But the door remained closed. The truth hit her like a slap. He wasn't coming back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. A lump formed in her throat, but before she could fully process it, the bartender approached again. "Another glass?" he asked, nodding toward her nearly empty drink. Mia hesitated. The answer should have been no. She should have picked up her things, gone home and figured out how to move forward. But the idea of going home, to an empty house, to a cold bed, to silence, felt unbearable. So instead, she gave the bartender a small tired smile. "One more." The bartender nodded, replacing her glass with a fresh pour of wine. She lifted it to her lips, taking a slow sip, letting the burn of the alcohol dull the ache inside her. Just as she set the glass down, she felt someone slide into the seat next to her. The presence was familiar before she even turned to look. Lucas. She sighed before he even spoke. "I thought you left," Lucas smirked, his gaze flickering over her face like he was searching for something. "I did." "Then why are you here?" He leaned against the bar, his posture relaxed in a way that made her stomach tighten. Lucas always had this way about him. Calm, confident, in control. He never rushed, never seemed uncertain, and tonight was no different. "I could ask you the same thing," he murmured. Mia looked away, staring at her wine. "I'm not ready to go home yet." Lucas nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Because home doesn't feel like home anymore." Mia's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. He always had a way of cutting through the lies she told herself. "I don't want to talk about this with you," she muttered. "Then let's not talk," Lucas said simply. The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Mia turned to him, her pulse quickening. She should have told him to leave, should have gotten up, walked away, gone home. But she didn't. Instead, she let herself look at him. Really look at him. Lucas hadn't changed much since the last time they had been this close. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing eyes that always seemed to see straight through her. The years had been kind to him, and unlike Ryan, he didn't look exhausted by the weight of responsibility. He looked alive, and for the first time in a long time Mia felt seen. She hated it. "You like making things complicated, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas smirked. "Not complicated, just honest." Mia exhaled slowly, turning back to her drink. "I should go." "You should," Lucas agreed, but neither of them moved. Silence stretched between them, charged and dangerous. Lucas reached for his drink, swirling the liquid inside. "You know," he said casually. "I meant what I said earlier." Mia's throat went dry. "About what?" He glanced at her, eyes dark and unreadable. "That you deserve to be chosen." Mia's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She swallowed hard. "I can't do this, Lucas. I'm not asking you to." "Then what do you want?" she asked, turning to face him fully now. Lucas held her gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached forward, brushing his fingers lightly over the back of her hand. The touch was barely there, but it sent a shiver down her spine. "I want you to remember what it feels like to be wanted." Mia inhaled sharply, her body betraying her with the way it reacted to his words. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of moment she had spent years avoiding. Her marriage might have been broken, but was she really ready to step into something new? Or had she already done so without even realizing it? Lucas didn't push. He didn't lean in, didn't try to take anything from her. He just waited. For her decision. For whatever happened next. Mia's fingers trembled against her glass. And for the first time that night, she wasn't sure if she wanted to walk away. Mia's breath was unsteady, her mind racing as Lucas's words settled over her like a heavy, unshakable weight. I want you to remember what it feels like to be wanted. The words echoed inside her, louder than they had any right to be, because the truth was, she had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at like she mattered, like she was someone worth noticing, worth chasing, worth keeping. Ryan had spent years making her feel invisible, and now, in one night, Lucas had done the opposite. She should have walked away. She should have left before it was too late. But she didn't move. Instead, she sat there, staring down at their hands, the place where his fingers had just barely grazed her skin, like an invitation, a choice. Mia swallowed hard, setting her glass down slowly, deliberately. You always had a way with words, she murmured, forcing a small, bitter smile. Lucas smirked, but there was something different in his eyes now, something quieter. And you always had a way of pretending you didn't want to hear them. Mia exhaled, running a hand through her hair. You think this is about you? Lucas tilted his head slightly, watching her carefully. I think this is about you. Her stomach twisted. Because he was right. This wasn't about Ryan, about their broken marriage, about the years of neglect or the loneliness that had become second nature to her. This was about her choices, her wants, her needs, things she had buried beneath years of waiting, things she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Lucas studied her for a moment, then leaned back, his gaze sharp but unreadable. Tell me to leave, Mia. She blinked, caught off guard by the challenge in his voice. If you don't want me here, he continued, if this isn't what you want, say it, right now, and I'll leave. The air between them felt electric, heavy, dangerous. Lucas wasn't pushing. He wasn't forcing her into anything. He was making her decide, and that terrified her more than anything else. Her fingers tightened around the napkin in her lap. She could feel her pulse in her throat, in her fingertips, in every inch of her skin that was suddenly too warm. She could lie. She could tell him to go, push him away, pretend that none of this had ever happened. But her hesitation was already an answer. Lucas's eyes darkened slightly, like he could see the war raging inside her. You don't have to do anything, Mia, he murmured. You just have to be honest with yourself. Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth, prepared to say something, anything. But before she could, her phone buzzed on the counter. The sharp vibration shattered the moment, yanking her back to reality like a bucket of ice water. Mia flinched, her fingers moving on instinct as she grabbed the phone and looked at the screen. Ryan. Her stomach twisted violently. She hadn't expected him to call. Lucas didn't say anything, but she could feel his eyes on her, watching, waiting. Mia hesitated for a second too long. The phone buzzed again, the sound pressing against her ribs like a silent question. What now? Lucas exhaled softly. That's your answer, isn't it? Mia's heart ached. She didn't know if it was guilt, relief, or something else entirely, but she pressed accept. Ryan. Her voice came out softer than she intended. There was a pause on the other end, a breath, a hesitation, then Mia. One word, her name. But it sounded different now. Tired, defeated. Ryan stopped himself. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost fragile. I need to see you. Mia's grip on the phone tightened. Lucas's gaze flickered, and for the first time his smirk disappeared. He already knew. She was leaving. Mia forced herself to stand. her legs shaky beneath her as she grabbed her purse. She turned to Lucas, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, like she owed him an explanation. But Lucas simply nodded, not angry, not surprised, just accepting. "Go," he said quietly. Mia swallowed the lump in her throat and turned away. She walked out of the Regent, the weight of the night pressing down on her like an avalanche. But the moment she stepped outside, she realized something. No matter what Ryan had to say, no matter what came next, this wasn't the end. Something had already shifted inside her, and she wasn't sure if she could ever go back. Mia drove through the city streets, her fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The weight of Ryan's voice still echoed in her ears. "I need to see you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a please. And for reasons she didn't fully understand, she had answered it. The air inside the car felt suffocating, thick with unspoken words and emotions she hadn't yet processed. She barely registered the familiar roads, the flashing streetlights, the late-night silence of the world outside. Her mind was still inside the Regent, still sitting at that bar, still feeling the ghost of Lucas's touch against her skin. She should have told him to leave, but she hadn't. She should have walked away before it got this far, but she didn't. She had sat there, listening to every single word he said, letting them sink into the parts of her she had spent years trying to numb. Lucas had done something tonight that Ryan never had. He had given her a choice. Ryan had always assumed she would stay, assumed she would forgive him, wait for him, be there when he finally decided to look up from his world and notice that hers was falling apart. Lucas had reminded her that she didn't have to. Mia swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as she pulled into the long driveway leading to their house. Her house. Their house. For the first time, it didn't feel like home. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow against the dark exterior. Ryan's car was parked in its usual spot, and she could see the faint flicker of movement through the front window. He was waiting for her. She killed the engine, but didn't move. Her hand stayed on the wheel, her heart hammering so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Why was she here? Because he had asked. Because after everything, a part of her still needed to know if there was anything left to save. Mia sucked in a deep breath, forcing herself to push the door open. The night air hit her immediately, cool against her flushed skin. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she made her way up the steps, her stomach twisting with every step. The moment she reached the door, it opened before she could knock. Ryan stood there, his eyes shadowed, his shirt slightly wrinkled like he had been running his hands through his hair over and over again. He looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained in a way she had never seen before. For a moment, they just stood there. Neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Ryan stepped back, his voice quiet. "Come in." Mia hesitated, really hesitated, before crossing the threshold. The house smelled the same, warm vanilla and a hint of his cologne. Everything was exactly where she had left it, but it didn't feel the same. She felt like a stranger in her own life. Ryan shut the door, exhaling slowly before turning to face her. "Mia, She shook her head. "Don't." Ryan closed his mouth, swallowing hard. Mia crossed her arms over her chest, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever you were about to say, I don't want it to be another excuse, or a half-hearted promise, or something you think I want to hear." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I wasn't going to lie to you." "Then tell me the truth," she shot back, her voice sharp. "Tell me why it took another man reminding you that I exist for you to finally care." Ryan flinched, but she didn't stop. "Tell me Why I had to sit across from your enemy to hear the words you should have said years ago. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. Tell me why you let it get this far, Ryan. His hands clenched at his sides, his shoulders rising and falling as he sucked in a deep breath. Then he spoke. Because I thought I had more time. Mia's breath caught. Ryan ran a hand over his face, letting out a broken laugh. I told myself I'd fix things when work settled down, when I wasn't so busy, when things weren't so stressful. I told myself that you'd always be there when I finally got it together. He looked up at her, his expression raw. But I was wrong, wasn't I? Mia stared at him, her pulse hammering. He swallowed. I've been losing you for a long time, haven't I? She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because he already knew. Ryan let out a shaky breath, stepping closer. Mia, I love you. I love you more than anything. And I know I've been terrible at showing it. I know I let my pride, my job, my own damn selfishness push you away. His voice broke slightly. But I don't want to lose you. Mia felt tears sting at the back of her eyes. She had wanted to hear those words for so long, but now that she had them, she wasn't sure they were enough. Ryan must have seen the hesitation in her face, because something in his expression shifted. Desperation flickered across his features, and he reached for her hand, his touch familiar but different somehow. Softer. I'll do anything, he whispered. Just tell me what I have to do. Mia inhaled sharply, looking down at their hands. There had been a time when she would have fought for this, a time when she would have given anything to hear him say he was willing to fight for her too. But that time had passed, hadn't it? The truth was, she didn't know if she had anything left to fight with. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. Ryan. He shook his head. Please. Mia let out a slow, unsteady breath, and then, finally, she said the words she had been afraid of all night. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Ryan's face crumbled. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Ryan wasn't the one walking away. This time, it was Mia. Ryan stood motionless, his breathing uneven, his fingers twitching like he wanted to reach for her but didn't dare. Mia's words hung in the air between them, heavier than anything they had said before. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Not, I don't love you, not I'm leaving, just uncertainty. But sometimes, uncertainty was worse than finality. Ryan's jaw tightened, his body rigid as if forcing himself to stand still to not break. You don't mean that, he said, his voice low, almost fragile. Mia swallowed, blinking back the tears burning in her eyes. I don't know what I mean anymore. Ryan's chest rose and fell unevenly. Mia! She shook her head. Please don't try to fix this with words, Ryan. Not this time. Ryan let out a slow breath, his hands clenching at his sides before he nodded once. Okay. Silence stretched between them, and for the first time neither of them rushed to fill it. Mia took a slow step back, the distance between them growing, not just physically, but in a way that felt irreversible. Ryan exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair before finally speaking again. Are you leaving? His voice cracked just slightly, betraying the fear he was trying to hide. Mia hesitated. She wanted to say no. She wanted to say she just needed time, that they could find a way back to each other, that this moment didn't have to mean the end. But as she stood there, looking at the man she'd spent years loving, waiting for, fighting for, she realized something. She had already left. Maybe not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. A part of her had already walked away a long time ago. And tonight, she had finally caught up with herself. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not because she didn't care, but because because she'd spent too many nights crying over something she couldn't fix alone. She took another slow breath. I think we both need time. Ryan let out a hollow laugh, nodding to himself like he had already expected that answer, but hoped it wouldn't come. He looked at her then. Really looked at her, his gaze tracing her face like he was memorizing every inch of it. And for the first time in years, she saw it. Fear. Not anger, not frustration, but actual bone-deep fear. Because Ryan had spent so long assuming she would always be there. But now he wasn't so sure. And neither was she. Mia turned toward the door, her heart pounding. If she stayed another second, she knew she'd start second-guessing everything. Ryan's voice stopped her before she could walk out. If I had realized sooner, would that have changed anything? Mia closed her eyes for a brief moment before looking back at him. The truth was, she didn't know. Maybe if Ryan had fought for her before she had grown tired, before she had felt invisible, before she had sat across from Lucas and realized how much she had forgotten what it was like to be seen. Maybe. But maybe was not enough anymore. So instead of answering, she simply gave him a small, sad smile. I wish I knew. And then, before she could let herself hesitate, she turned the knob and stepped outside. The cold night air hit her instantly, biting against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, inhaling deeply as she stood on the porch. For years she had walked in and out of this house, and it had never felt different. Tonight, it did. Her legs felt heavy as she walked down the driveway. When she reached her car, she gripped the door handle, but for the first time she had no idea where she was supposed to go. She could go to a hotel. She could call a friend. She could even turn around and walk back inside, tell Ryan they'd figure it out, tell herself this was just a rough patch. But deep down, she knew the truth. Some things weren't meant to be repaired. Some things broke so slowly, so quietly, that by the time you noticed, there was nothing left to fix. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, staring at the screen. Lucas. Mia's fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment. She could answer. She could let him tell her exactly what she wanted to hear. She could step into something new, something exciting, something that reminded her she was still alive. But would that be running towards something, or just running away? Her thumb hovered over the accept button, her pulse quickening. Then, slowly, deliberately, she pressed decline. For once, this wasn't about Ryan, and it wasn't about Lucas. This was about her. Mia inhaled deeply, gripping the steering wheel as she started the engine. She wasn't going to Ryan. She wasn't going to Lucas. She was finally choosing herself. And for the first time in years, she had no idea where she was going. But for the first time in years, that didn't scare her. Thank you all for listening to this story with our channel. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe to motivate us to bring more interesting stories. Much love to all of you.